The world has a lot of different languages, anywhere between 3 and 7,000, coming in all shapes and varieties. English, for example, is a Germanic language that originated in England and is now spoken as a major world language. Spanish is also a widely spoken language, but is a Romance language that originated on the Iberian Peninsula. German is a Germanic language more limited to Central Europe. Arabic is a widespread and diverse Semitic language divided into several different dialects. Chinese is either one language with a bunch of very different dialects, or a family of several similar languages, depending on your political views. And Basque is... yeah, literally no one knows what Basque even is. But turn the clock back a couple thousand years, and what exactly were all the languages spoken in the ancient world all like? Starting off, for no real reason in particular in Rome, Latin is today considered a dead language, mainly used nowadays for liturgical purposes within the Catholic Church. However, 2,000 years ago, it was of course the main language of the Roman Empire, where it would spread across Europe, diversifying into the various Romance languages that we see today. Latin first popped up as an Italic language nearly 3,000 years ago, and is perhaps one of the most widely recognized dead languages out there, having influenced not only its Romantic descendants, but also the English language as the language of science and medicine, and, through both its prestige in Europe following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and also the Norman conquest of England, also became the fancy pants language of England. So in English, basically all our fancy words come from Latin. Basically, think of the difference between raising a schwein and eating porcus. One thing to keep in mind about Latin, though, is how it was pronounced in Roman times, especially in regard to how modern Romance languages pronounce their C's and J's and V's. In Roman Latin, C's were always pronounced k, J didn't actually exist and was just written as an I and pronounced accordingly, and V also didn't exist and was actually a U, just shaped like a modern V. Oh, and also H was actually pronounced, as opposed to being silent. Also, they always wrote in caps lock rage, which is really annoying. NativeLang made a much better video on all this, but in a sense, what this all means is that one of Gaius Julius Caesar's famous quotes was in fact pronounced Veni, Vidi, Vici. And once he crossed the Rubicon and had to continue on his current path, well, jacta alea esto. And although it might not have ended very well for him, his ambitions did certainly pay off for his adoptive son, Imperator Caesar Divifilius Augustus. Now, it is important to remember that, although Latin is effectively a dead language, seeing as it no longer has native speakers, it has still evolved since the time of the Romans, and does keep up with modern vocabulary. So you're not really pronouncing it wrong in any way if you're pronouncing it like Italian, maybe unless you're actually quoting someone from ancient Rome. In which case, hostiae non ostiae. By the way, if you want to hear people actually speaking all these languages, I've linked some videos down below that you can also check out. This video is actually going more into the grammar and the history behind the languages, and also I didn't want to just completely rip off content from other people. Though they stem from different branches of the Indo-European family tree, one language that had a huge impact on Rome, and even the Latin language, was Greek, likely the sole inhabitant of the Hellenic branch of the Indo-European language family. Greek is still spoken today by over 13 million people as the official language of two countries, though obviously with many differences from its counterpart spoken by all the famous philosophers and engineers and generals and what have you. From the info I've been able to find at least, ancient Greek is not fully intelligible to modern Greek speakers, though a lot of core vocabulary is still recognizable. If you're proficient in the Greek language though, please do tell us below with your experiences of ancient Greek. As different as ancient Greek was from modern Greek though, especially regarding the pronunciation of certain letters in the script, which changed over the millennia, there were also many different dialects spoken across the different city-states, divided into different groups, including the Aeolic, Arcado-Cypriot, West, and Ionic Attic. However, after the 4th century BC, especially with the conquest of Alexander the Great, the different dialects started to merge to form a more closely knit language, with Koine Greek developing as a kind of super-regional dialect, what with the language now being spoken in Egypt and Libya and Syria, and also that one Greek kingdom that established itself all the way out in Afghanistan. That's a real thing, by the way, go look it up. Greek was not the only language that influenced Latin, though. Another one was Etruscan, or Mikrasnal, a non-Indo-European language part of the theoretical Tersanian language family, spoken in the north of Italy by the Etruscans, and which wrote with the Old Italic script, another descendant of the Greek script, which would later evolve into the Latin script. As the language had effectively died out by the early 1st century AD, not much is known about this language or how it really worked, though it did loan plenty of words to Latin, such as satnal, which likely gave rise to the Latin satellis, which in turn gave rise to the English term satellite. The language would eventually dissipate under the pressure of the expanding Roman Republic, though would still be known to scholars, effectively going extinct in the 5th century. Emperor Claudius even knew Etruscan and wrote a 20-volume history of the Etruscans, though unfortunately none of these survive to this day. So what precious little we do know of this language and its grammar, we've mostly had to piece together ourselves. Moving on to the Middle East, where we of course have a lot of languages we can talk about, today Egypt is the most populous Arab country in the world. Or I guess the most populous country in the Arab world. Or most Arab country world in the populace. However, the Arabic language originated in, well, Arabia. And while it is indeed an old language, it of course isn't nearly as old as the Egyptian language, or Ra'an Kumat. Egyptian, however, like Arabic, was an Afro-Asiatic language, as we can tell through various features, such as its fusional though not quite agglutinative grammar, emphatic consonants, the feminine suffix at, and its 3 core vowel sounds of a, e, and u. That being said though, it was not a Semitic language like many of the other Afro-Asiatic languages that you've probably heard of, for example Arabic or Hebrew or Amharic, though it does share many close similarities with these languages, as well as with the Amazigh languages to the west. Of course, I should be careful with what tense I use in this context, since a descendant of Egyptian, known as Coptic Egyptian, is still used for liturgical affairs in the Coptic Church of Alexandria, though it largely fell out of use in daily life in the 18th century. AD. Let's go back into the Mediterranean world and talk about Phoenician, or Canatnim, the language whose script ultimately gave rise to basically every single script used on the European continent. Phoenician, however, wasn't an Indo-European or Tersanian language, but a Semitic language. So obviously there were a few letters used for sounds more often used in Semitic languages that were only kind of awkwardly integrated into the Indo-European languages. And it was actually an abjad, meaning that vowels weren't always written like they are in alphabets. Unlike cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs though, this system was one that could easily be used and molded by other languages, as had indeed happened. Through what we know of the language, it had a lot of similarities to Hebrew and Aramaic, though most of the 10,000 inscriptions that we have access to today are on monuments and pottery, not the papyrus and parchment that they would have mostly written on, since those materials aren't really known for holding up very well after 3,000 years in the salty sea air. Finally, we finish off, at least for this video, with Sumerian, or Emengir, a language isolate spoken in the city-state of Sumer throughout the 4th and 3rd millennia BC. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a language isolate is simply a language with no known relatives, so there aren't really any languages that we can compare to Sumerian in any way, though many have theorized connections to families from Sino-Tibetan to Uralic to even trying to see if it can fit in with Basque. But Basque and Sumerian ain't about checking all your little boxes. Despite all this, Sumerian was, as far as we know, the earliest language to ever be written down, with its system of cuneiform being the oldest on record. Sumerian was an agglutinative language with an SOV word order and 2 grammatical genders, animate or inanimate. Sumerian had been prominent in the region for well over 1,000 years, and would later coexist with, and eventually disappear to, the Semitic Akkadian language, with Sumerian later being used for liturgical purposes up until the 1st century AD, which is actually amazingly recent when you think about just how old this language was. So I realize I probably skipped over a lot of the languages that you might have wanted me to cover: Akkadian, Aramaic, Hittite, Old Chinese, Mayan, Inca, Tocharian. Whatever you're thinking, it was a hard decision to omit from this video. Regardless, this is a video that I feel really deserves a follow-up, as do a lot of my other recent videos, now that I think about it. So if this video does well enough, I'll make another video on some other languages of your choosing. Do let me know in the comments below, and once again, if you want to actually hear these languages spoken, check the links down below just below the sources. Thanks as always for watching. If you like this video and want more of the Canubis experience, might I recommend you visit a couple places. The first is the Canubis Discord server, invite link down below, and also our subreddit r/Canubis, which isn't as active, but I'd really like it to be. Either way, do be sure to like and share this video, consider supporting through Patreon or merch if you can, and subscribe to learn something new every Sunday.